Y'all, today we need to talk about Wizard101's latest dungeon and why people are mad about it. In a previous video, right, I covered exactly what they did with their release of Nightmare Standard Mode. They released a challenge mode first, and then they released a standard mode. The idea is that the challenge mode is supposed to be harder, but the drops are better. And the idea of standard mode is that it's supposed to be easier, but the drops aren't as generous. Now that it's been a few days since the standard mode came out, a lot of people that are casual players have run this dungeon, and today I wanted to talk about why it fails in a lot of key ways. For one, the dungeon is actually really well designed. However, because of the fact that it is something that's a little bit more ambitious, I don't think team up actually is that compatible with this dungeon. The whole point of team up is that if you're a casual player, you don't maybe, you know, occupy spaces like Discord or other social media where you can connect with players outside of Wizard101, well then team up should be the thing for you, right? You should be able to connect with people through the game, run any dungeon at any level as long as it's a casual version of it. I think this has progressed into a worse and worse issue as time has gone on. I think we already saw this in Novus. The final dungeon of Novus was something that people did team up for. It was a nightmare simply because people needed to know how Archmastery worked. But for this dungeon, you kind of need to know how the side bosses work. You need to know how the main boss works. You need to know how the mazes work. Standard mode is very doable if you run it up with the same team several times and learn how to get better as the runs go on. But changing up the team every single run, I feel like that's going to make you lose an insane amount of progress. And let's not forget, the goal of people running this dungeon isn't just to, like, you know, get better at the dungeon. It's to defeat it 25 times so that they can unlock the recipes to craft the gear from it. And 25 times through team up means you have 25 different teams. That's a nightmare to deal with, literally no cap. The other part that surprisingly makes the standard mode a little bit harder than the advanced content version is the fact that spells that are allowed only in PvP are not allowed in standard mode. You might argue that spells that are banned in PvP are allowed in standard mode, and that does allow you to do stuff like Mass Feint. It allows you to do stuff like Incendiate that you couldn't do in the more challenging version of the fight. But let's say people don't have this gear, right? Let's say they don't have this crown's gear. Well, then they actually have access to less damage than someone who's doing the challenge mode, because gambits literally give you free damage for doing stuff that the spell likes, right? The whole point of a storm sign is if you can actually cover a bunch of good blades with, like, you know, 4 blades you don't mind giving up, you're doing 1900 damage, which is way higher for 9 pips than anything else you could do. The way spells that are only allowed in PvP work, you can only use them in advanced mode. You cannot use them in standard mode. So unless you have access to spells like Incendiate that add damage to overtimes or Mass Feint or things that they've deemed too powerful for PvP, you don't actually have a damage advantage going into standard mode. For that reason alone, it's not clear-cut easier. Even though there is no timer, even though you can use potions, even though spells that are banned in PvP are allowed, there are still ways in which you actually have less access to damage. I feel like much like the team up problem, this is also a part of an issue that's been growing as time has gone on. Let's talk about the fact that professors that you go to basically have so many spells that you can train from them that are only allowed in PvP, right? All of the Rochambeau spells, all of the Gambit. It's annoying and overwhelming to look at when you don't do PvP, and the fact that there are so many spells now that are only allowed in PvP, it takes away from the part of the game that a lot of people enjoy, the freedom to use any spell they want in a casual mode. I understand why PvP and PvE stat-wise need to be kind of separate. I think stats can get kind of crazy, but I really question why these spells are still only allowed in PvP. It makes things like challenge mode very weird because you have access to damage from sources that you don't have access to in standard. I think for a lot of people, as time goes on, like, hopefully they add ways to explain the symbols that are happening, you know, like this spell, for example, does extra damage when you have 2 heals. It'd be nice if you could mouse over this spell, see that that's what it does. They could add like a way to read what the card does. I don't see why they would need to, like, make it only available to people that are interested in PvP or raids even. I think letting players experiment, even in standard mode with spells that do complex things, I think that can only do good for the game. It could make things like the Nightmare standard mode much more doable. And finally, probably my singular biggest pet peeve with this entire dungeon is the fact that the obstacle that they created was one of the more frustrating things that they've ever added into the game. If you've seen me do streams of me doing this dungeon, right, there's this thing called a broken dream. It's like a circle of death that follows you around a maze. Oh no, this hoe. I think it's right here, y'all. Go. Yeah. What? I said yes as I died. wait, I made it though. And while the concept itself is actually fine, I do think that they went a little overboard with some of them. Sometimes they overlap and dead ass corner you. As you do it more, you will be able to very consistently avoid them, which is good. But things like server lag, things like desync, things like, you know, playing from a different country even, that type of stuff makes this less accessible to casual players, right? Casual players don't really want to choose whether, you know, it's an American that I'm playing with versus someone from Australia or something. That's a whole lot of extra thinking and planning just to tackle what should be a very easy dungeon if it truly is casual. In the future, what I hope is that they make challenges like the broken dreams and the nightmares, right? Like these like things that follow you around and send you back to the beginning of a maze. That's what they do. I think they need to make those less frustrating. That's hard to like strike, obviously. Things that are difficult can be inherently frustrating, but I think the second you add things like whether someone's too laggy to be on your team, it makes stuff like standard mode way less approachable for so many people. It'd be cool if they explored a way to make the puzzle aspects of future dungeons anyways more about the fighting than actually about the, you know, other parts. I actually really liked the Dreamwater part where you had to look for pumps and stuff. I actually thought that that was like my favorite part of the whole dungeon. So it's not like they completely, you know, hit and missed on this, but I do think that, I don't know, I think they created a pretty frustrating experience with the Broken Dreams, something that's not as casual friendly, especially in standard mode. Wiz did succeed in a key way with this update. They really did make challenge mode rewarding, which I think is important for the future of the game. There does need to be things that you can do to challenge yourself so you can get easier drops. That otherwise it will always be an extremely grindy game with extremely easy fights. That's not a good combo. That being said, I do think they need to reassess what they want to get out of standard mode. I think standard mode, especially for the Nightmare Dungeon right now, it is just too hard. Either they need to allow spells that are currently only allowed in PvP to be allowed in standard mode, or they need to make it easier to organize teams that you can keep running with in team up. Maybe when they're transitioning, you know, from challenge mode to standard mode for future dungeons, if there are obstacles like the Broken Dreams, maybe they could lower the difficulty of them when going into standard mode, maybe lower the amount of them, the number of them, how they behave, right? Stuff like that would really differentiate between the two so that, you know, one doesn't just feel like a punishment for not being good enough at doing something that's hard. Let me know what you guys think about standard mode. I did want to talk about it now that a few days have passed. You know, people have started running it up. I've also, like, you know, been looking at people's feedback on it. But let me know, do you guys think that the reasons that I brought up are the reasons why standard mode feels a lot harder than it should be? I look forward to reading all of y'all's opinions. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave us something new. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.